Welcome to another Bear Attack Stories Marathon, showcasing some of the most brutal bear attacks covered on the channel so far. These stories include hunters who were fatally mauled by a grizzly seeking revenge, a man who was eaten alive after using bear spray, and much more. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. These are the most terrifying bear attack stories you will ever hear. Welcome to Final Affliction. It's summertime in Black Bear Country, and Donna Munson woke up in her log cabin in Ouray County, Colorado. She expected her day to go as usual: breakfast, tea, ignoring her neighbors' complaints, and an afternoon of watching the bears eat through her picture window. Sadly, things didn't go as planned for this unsuspecting senior. Donna's cabin was nestled between the vast mountains of Ouray and Ridgway, two towns that hosted some of Colorado's 960 wildlife species. She had all the space she needed to commune with her friends. She didn't really want to think about the pesky neighbors, but they'd made so much noise that she couldn't help hearing their voices in her head. They wanted her to stop feeding her babies, but that wasn't something she was ever ready to do. Too bad it led to her unfortunate downfall. Tired of having their lives disrupted by hungry bears destroying property for food, her neighbors filed complaints with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They said that the bears' repeated visits to rummage through trash cans and break into homes was enough proof that what Donna was doing was dangerous. Her neighbors warned that she was not only putting herself at risk, but also everyone else at risk, because the bears will come expecting handouts and will surely get violent with anyone who couldn't deliver. Donna was a woman of her own opinions. No one would tell her what to do, so she ignored all their chatter. She believed they simply didn't understand her special connection with nature. They didn't get that the animals were as much as family as they were friends. Ever since her husband had passed on, it was her duty to keep his legacy alive by taking care of the animals just like he did. Like almost every sweet old granny, she fed stray cats, then took it an extra mile to feed raccoons, skunks, elk, deer, and eventually her baby, the black bears. The neighbors could complain all they wanted. They could warn her for all she cared. She wasn't going to stop feeding the wildlife. The fact that the bears kept coming over for food had to mean that the poor darlings were just hungry. What kind of monster would she be if she didn't put some food in their tummies? Besides, she'd been feeding the animals for over 10 years and none of them had dared harm her. Donna decided to stop taking the CPW's calls and reading their letters. They couldn't really do anything to her, and it wasn't their business what she did on her property. Better yet, she wasn't stupid. She had a fence built to wrap around her front porch. This way, she could feed the bears through it without getting too close for comfort. It was a sturdy, standard farm fence made of wood and wire mesh, and it had served her diligently all this while. It was enough protection, and there was no way she would stop feeding her dear friends. With her conviction steeled, Donna went about her day. Pesky neighbors aside, she had other things to worry about. The night before, an injured bear cub ambled toward her porch. At that time, she'd been on the phone with a relative, and she had to end the call and move quickly to tend to the poor baby. Where was its mother? Why was it all alone? Was there a way to get it back to its family? All those questions didn't matter at the moment. First, Donna had to make sure the poor baby was all right. She fed it hard-boiled eggs and yogurt, but while the sweet angel was eating, an older bear tried to harm the cub. Donna couldn't let that stand. Using a broom, she chased off the bully, ultimately saving the cub. She didn't want to hit the bear, after all. It was her friend too, but she had to have her priorities straight, and the injured baby needed her more at the moment. It had fled during the attack, and she wondered if it was okay or if she could have done more to help. These thoughts still plagued her later that Friday as she got food ready for the bears. As always, she was going to sit on her porch and watch quietly as they ate. Watching the bears was one of her favorite pastimes, and she liked that she could watch them while they watched her. They probably thought of her fondly too. After all, she'd fed them constantly. They surely had her back, but she couldn't be more wrong. Donna got herself ready on her porch and watched as the hungry animals started to show up. She was pleased to lose herself in their company once again. After the death of her husband, Donna barely spent much time with other humans. She knew that old acquaintances had mentioned that they didn't like her all alone out in the area with so many animals, but Ouray was her home, and the bears were her people. Donna got closer to the fence, ready to watch her babies eat through its protection. It was unfortunate that she had to use her walker and that she couldn't interact with her beloved animals as much as she would if she was still young and spry, but it was fine. She'd do her best to look after her friends with the strength that she had. As Donna walked up to the fence, she spotted 2 black bears, clearly hungry and anticipating the food she had for them. The sight only made her heart soar further. The neighbors and wildlife professionals really didn't know what they were talking about. This was bliss. As she got closer, her happiness started to wane and her heart sank to the pit of her stomach. The bears were her babies, but she'd miscalculated the love they had for her. Frozen with fear, she could do nothing but stare as one of the bears reached through the fence and knocked her down. One mighty paw to the head was all it took to render Donna unconscious. The hungry, angry bear went at her head with its claws and pulled her body under the fence that was supposed to protect her with its teeth. It had come for food, and it seemed that hard-boiled eggs and nuts were simply not enough. The bear wanted its pound of flesh, and it found it in the woman who called it her friend. Another nearby bear, seeing what was happening, rushed forward for its share of Donna. Together, the bears tore Donna limb from limb and devoured her. Donna was only found later that same day when a handyman looking for work stopped by her cabin. He was looking for a painting job and surely didn't expect to find a bloody, mangled corpse waiting for him. The man wasted no time in calling the police, and just moments later, the Ouray County Sheriff's Department was on the scene. Joel Burke, a detective with the department, was first on the scene, and he immediately started interviewing potential witnesses. While he was talking to the neighbors and others on the scene, grunts and roars filled the air. A 250-pound bear was barreling towards them, and it showed no signs of slowing down or showing the smaller humans mercy. It wanted the body, and it wasn't backing down until it had its meal between its teeth again. When things started to heat up, Joel rounded up the bystanders and drove them to safety in his car, where he retrieved his weapon. He was trembling because it's not every day that a small human faces off against a ferocious bear. Joel didn't want to shoot, but it was kill or be killed and eaten. Plus, there were people to protect, and as an investigator, he had to find out what really happened to Donna. So squaring his shoulders, Joel raised his gun and let a bullet fly. Joel had to shoot down a second bear that same day, a 394-pound male. With both dead and Donna's body secured, the department could finally get some real answers as to what happened. An autopsy on the bears' bodies revealed that the bigger bear had human flesh, Donna's flesh, in its stomach. Aside from her flesh, the bear had part of her shirt in its stomach as well. The results came out inconclusive for the smaller bear, but there was no doubt that it would have had its fair share of Donna if Joel hadn't done something about it. Donna Munson, the nature-loving old lady, often rented out half of her house in southwestern Colorado to several people over the years. One of the tenants recalled that Donna had once told them that when the time came, she wanted to go out with the bears. That's exactly what she did, even though it might not have been how she thought things would go. And although her love for nature can be commended, the fact that she refused to follow one simple instruction put herself, her neighbors, and the very same bear she claimed to love in danger. 2 bears died because of her that day, and if she really loved them as much as she proclaimed, she would have been heartbroken to find out. Hikers and residents of wildlife-inhabited areas are instructed not to feed the animals for a good reason, and if only Donna had not treated the bears like she would a neighbor's dog, she might have avoided such a gruesome, final affliction. Brady Penn was an experienced senior airman in the U.S. Air Force in 2021 when he suddenly received a call from his father, Steve. This was not uncommon as he spoke to his father regularly, and so he picked up the phone. He could tell his father was excited as he quickly explained that he had won a hunting lottery, meaning that he had been awarded a permit to hunt for elk on Afognak Island. The island is famous for having some of the best hunting and fishing opportunities in North America and attracted lots of visitors during their holidays. It has an impressive diversity of wildlife, including the largest elk in North America, the Roosevelt elk. This animal is a prized catch among hunters and is something to really boast about catching. It's also impossible without a permit. The permit meant that only certain people were able to hunt in the area to avoid the destruction of the fragile ecosystems. You are able to enter the lottery for specific animals that you are allowed to hunt, and today, Steve had finally been selected and he wanted his son to go with him for a week-long trip. Brady immediately agreed, as he knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and wanted to spend time with his dad. For the next few months, the pair prepared for their adventure, as they knew that they would have to use their survival skills if they wanted to stay on the windswept island of Afognak. The island was well known for its unpredictable weather and strong winds, so they had to make sure they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into. They tested their equipment over and over to make sure they were prepared, undertook intensive hikes nearby, improved their shooting abilities, and made sure they had a plan for anything that may go wrong. Brady had been trained by the military, and Steve had lived in Alaska for over 30 years. They both knew what it took to survive. After months of training, they were ready for a trip of a lifetime. On the morning of October 12, 2021, the father and son duo were ready and waiting for their trip. They were stood on the dock waiting for their plane to take them to the island where they would be left all alone for a week. The wind was already increasing in strength, and the morning fog was thickening with every moment that they waited. The seaplane floated slowly towards them, giving the men one last chance to turn back and cancel their trip. With the increasingly bad weather, it was becoming apparent that if any issues arose during their time away, it would be almost impossible for an emergency rescue to save them. They decided that they would be able to deal with any problem that came their way and boarded the plane to take them to Afognak Island. It was a very small plane, and despite being battered with turbulence for the duration of the 45-minute flight, they managed to arrive on the island in relative safety. The beach was empty, and the reality of their solitude was quickly hitting the pair. The pilot prepared to leave before turning to the men for some final advice. "That hill right there is going to be your best bet for a campsite," he said. "I'll see you in a week unless we hear from you sooner. I can't say I envy you out here in this weather." With that, he got back into the seaplane and flew away, leaving the father and son duo truly stranded. They hurriedly began setting up their tent to protect themselves from the night that would quickly be setting in. They managed to erect it just in time as more wind and freezing rain began to unleash onto them. They eventually slept, knowing that the next few days would really put their survival skills to the test. The next morning rolled around and the weather had not improved. The men knew they couldn't wait for too long, so begrudgingly packed up their belongings and began the difficult hike through thorns and thick bracken, and Brady could feel any exposed skin being ripped and torn by the passing branches. After receiving a beating from the elements, they made it to a ridge and found a game trail towards the valley beneath them. They followed the trail together, hopeful that they would be able to find some elk soon. Suddenly, Brady spotted a herd in the distance, and they began to stalk their prey, but lost them as suddenly as they had discovered them due to the tough terrain. They began to feel disheartened, but continued their trek in the hopes that a miracle might happen. Just like that, they abruptly found themselves face to face with a massive male elk. Instinctively, Brady fired his gun in the direction of the animal, knowing that he had only a split second to react before the elk would smell or hear him and bolt for cover again. The 1,200-pound animal crumpled to the floor, and just like that, they had accomplished their week-long goal in just 60 minutes. The duo were elated and happily began to cut up the elk so that they could take it back to their camp with them, and eventually take some of it back home. They knew that they wouldn't be able to take most of it back, but they could certainly try. They brought some back to the camp, but left the rest in a bright white game bag that they decided to hang in a tree so that nothing could get into it. The next day they returned, but quickly realized they couldn't see their bag in the tree anymore. They assumed it was the wind that had knocked it down, and so continued towards the area to check it out, cocking their guns just in case. They walked through the long grass, feeling at peace among the singing birds and long grasses. Even if their bag and game were gone, they were still able to appreciate that they were in a breathtaking place and were thankful that they were able to come on this trip together. Suddenly, the meadow fell silent, no birds at all. All they could hear was a low growling, and that's when they knew that they were in big trouble. Just 30 feet away, a huge Kodiak bear was charging right towards them, running through the trees as if they weren't even there, its eyes fixed on Brady and Steve. Before Brady could even blink, let alone draw his weapon, the bear was upon him. He was swatted to the side by a massive paw, pain shooting through his back as the bear put its entire body weight onto his spine. He was trapped, his rifle pushed beneath him, and with the extra weight on top of him, he had no way of moving. While he was thinking of what to do and how he could possibly survive this, the weight was removed from Brady's back. His father was pulling the bear off of him, giving him a final chance to save them both. The bear was immediately able to push Steve off of it, and after throwing him to the ground, was now also on top of him. But Brady was freed from the bear's weight and was holding his rifle. Despite the pain in his body, he struggled to his feet and fired his gun without a second thought, without even looking. The shot ripped through the bear's back hip, and with a ferocious roar of pain, the animal ran back into the trees. The pair quickly assessed each other for injuries, never taking their attention from the trees in case the animal came back. Steve had a few puncture wounds in his hands from the bear's teeth as he had been defending his son, but he had been wearing strong gloves and they were able to take the majority of the damage. Brady's trousers had been ripped and there were claw marks down his legs, but he was mostly unharmed. They were thankful that nothing worse had happened. They made their way back to their camp slowly and carefully, keeping a special eye out for the murderous bear. Luckily, they were able to make it back, and while they couldn't sleep as they listened out for any noises outside, they felt relatively safe within their camp. Luckily, this is the end of their story. The father and son were picked up by the plane the next day and were able to escape. Their teamwork, preparedness, and military training had saved them, proving once again that research and a little bit of luck will always provide you with some safety in the end, allowing them both to narrowly avoid becoming a food source for the bear and meeting their final affliction. Ward O'Connor was spending the summer camping in an RV with his fiancée, Jamie Wallace. For the couple, it was an adventure of a lifetime. Pulling up at different campsites along their route, they often went hiking in the surrounding bush before returning to their camper. They would cook dinner on an open fire and sit around the glowing embers as night drew in, chatting endlessly. Ward had grown up in Canada's British Columbia and was living in Mackenzie. After graduating from college, he became a carpenter and worked for a scaffolding company. Although it paid the bills, Ward never really enjoyed the work. His true passion was traveling. He told his mom that he would love to be a travel writer. Being paid to see the world would have been his dream job. For the time being, however, he had settled into a lifestyle of working for a few months to save up enough money before quitting and venturing off in his camper to explore the wilderness. The previous year, Ward had met Jamie at a friend's party. They spent the whole night talking and quickly became inseparable. Ward's love for nature and the great outdoors soon rubbed off on Jamie. He took her to his favorite camping spots and taught her how to make a fire. In early May 2015, they drove out of Mackenzie, a small town in British Columbia. With the open road and grand wilderness in front of them, excitement was building for what lay ahead. They took with them their trusty sidekick, Ward's dog. He was a black Great Dane and always accompanied Ward on his adventures. After a short drive, Ward turned up a forestry road and headed for a campsite. The RV bumped and bounced along the dirt track as they made their way through the forest along the banks of Parsnip River. This river runs for 150 miles through central British Columbia and is popular with anglers. When the couple arrived at the campsite, Ward, Jamie, and their dog jumped out of the van. They met their friend Dave Kirby there and spent the next 2 days walking and exploring the surrounding conifer forest trails. That night, as they were sipping their drinks in the RV, the three of them spotted a lone wolf sniffing through the campsite. It was interested in their fireplace and nervously inched closer. Jamie filmed it from the safety of the vehicle, posting the video clip on Facebook for her friends to see. After initially displaying curiosity, something spooked the wolf and it lolloped off into the darkness. The following afternoon, Dave had to head back to work, but spent most of the day with the others cleaning up the beach, cutting logs, and skinny dipping in the crystal clear water of Parsnip River. As evening began setting in, Dave said his goodbyes and headed off. Ward and Jamie lit the fire pit at their camping spot and set about preparing for dinner. Their dog loyally lay by their feet as they sat eating their food on what turned out to be their last evening together. It was a cloudless night, and as they gazed up into the starlit sky, there was a chill in the air. Jamie turned in for the night. She kissed Ward goodnight and stepped inside the RV. Ward said he'd be in shortly, but as he stared into the dying embers of the fire, his eyelids grew heavy. He lay down next to the fire pit feeling warm and content and closed his eyes. As Ward lay sleeping peacefully under the stars, the fire went out. He wouldn't have heard it, but there was a snap of a twig from the darkness. Footsteps of something big were coming his way, and he had no way of knowing what was about to happen. a lumbering beast, heavy and powerful, emerged from the bushes. Only a glint of silvery moonlight shimmering off its black fur would have been seen. Sniffing the air, it moved purposefully towards Ward. Muzzling Ward's legs and then his torso, it lifted a heavy paw and brought it down on Ward's ribs. Woken from his slumber, Ward felt the pressure of something huge on top of him. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel the warm, moist air of the creature's breath on his face. It opened its mouth, exposing its huge canines. A stale stench filled Ward's nostrils as he gasped in surprise. He desperately tried to push the bear off of him, but he was pinned down. Within seconds, the bear locked its jaws around Ward's neck, suffocating him. Ward didn't stand a chance. The bear tightened its grip around Ward's neck and dragged him away from the campfire and into the night. The sun had risen above the tree line by the time Jamie woke the following morning. Immediately, she felt like something was wrong. She climbed out of bed and peered through the RV window. Ward wasn't at the fire, but his dog was. She went outside and looked around. The dog was anxious. She asked him to find Ward, but he refused to move. Jamie set out along one of the paths leading from the campsite. There was no one else about. An ominous silence hung in the air. It wasn't long before Jamie came across some blood, and then some more. She followed the trail out of the woodland camp and up a hill. There, 200 yards away, was Ward. Jamie ran to him. He was lying crumpled on the floor. He was dead. Jamie screamed out in horror and ran back to the RV. She screeched out of the campsite and back to Mackenzie to tell Ward's father. Both he and the authorities rushed to the site. The wounds found on Ward were consistent with a black bear attack. He had been ambushed and attacked completely off guard. There was no sign of a struggle when his body was found. It is likely that he was stalked and hunted by the bear as he lay sleeping rather than accidentally stumbling upon him and killed out of curiosity or defense. Officers at the scene spotted a lone wolf nearby. At the time, they weren't sure what animal had been responsible for Ward's death, and they shot and killed the wolf. A short while later, conservation officers located and destroyed the bear they believed had killed Ward. Ward O'Connor's family said that he had a profound respect for wildlife. He didn't hunt and therefore didn't feel the need to carry a weapon of any kind. And even if he had had a firearm on him on the night of the attack, it is unlikely he would have been able to use it, as all evidence points towards him being killed almost instantly. It's devastating when someone who enjoys wildlife so much and thrives amongst nature is killed by it. However respectful we might be of wild animals, we must always remain vigilant. This is their habitat, not ours, and the moment we forget that is the moment we put ourselves at risk of meeting our final affliction. With the exception of his dog, Daniel worked alone. The rough, rugged terrain of the Alaskan mountains were his perfect office. He used his cabin in Turnagain as a base and set off on foot from it each day to work on the trail. The cabin was a couple of miles from a paved road that connected the community of Hope to the Seward Highway. The picturesque spot was about 25 miles southeast of Anchorage. On July 29, 2020, Daniel awoke early. He looked out through his cabin's window. He could see that he was blessed with clear blue skies for the day. He dressed in his gear, putting on his sturdy boots and clipping his bear spray canister onto his belt. It is believed he also placed his handgun in his backpack. During his construction work, he preferred to keep bear spray on him rather than a firearm. A shotgun or rifle weighed him down and got in the way. Daniel didn't plan on being out for long and decided he would return to the cabin for lunch later in the day. He picked up his water bottle and after a quick breakfast, he whistled to his dog and stepped outside. The two of them set off towards the path he was constructing. It was less than a mile from the cabin. Sawing down saplings and lopping off branches, Daniel gradually inched along the route he was carving through the great Alaskan wilderness. His dog carelessly sniffed around the surrounding trees and wandered through the clearing as Daniel worked. As midday loomed, the dense foliage sheltered Daniel from the growing heat of the rising sun. It was tiring work, and he paused for a breather, wiping the sweat from his brow and taking a sip from his water bottle, when suddenly, a brown bear came crashing through the undergrowth. Daniel barely had time to react. He fumbled for the bear spray, pointing it directly at the charging grizzly. He emptied the entire contents of the canister before the bear flattened him to the floor. Daniel struggled to breathe. The full force of the bear had knocked the wind from his lungs, and now it stood pushing down on him. its giant paws pressed firmly on his chest. Daniel kicked and thrashed about, trying desperately to hit the bear. He smacked the bear again and again on the snout, but this only enraged the bear more. It let out a deep, guttural growl and opened its jaws. Daniel could see saliva dripping from its jowls as it lowered its head menacingly. Ferociously, it bit into Daniel's face. He let out a yell as a tooth hit bone. Again, the bear bit down and scraped its claws over Daniel's chest. The attack that ensued was likely brutal and ferocious, but no one knows quite what happened to Daniel. His tragic death was both a shock to those who knew him and a mystery to others. His dog found its way home, and when Daniel's wife saw the dog arrive home without Daniel, she hurriedly called his friends. None of them had seen him. Working within such dense vegetation, it is likely that Daniel didn't see the bear until it was right upon him. If he did have his handgun in his backpack like his friend said he did, then there definitely wouldn't have been enough time to use it. Maybe it was his dog that alerted him to the bear, maybe Daniel had time to retreat a little, maybe the dog provoked the attack, no one quite knows. After Daniel's wife called his friends raising the alarm, they went to check on him. They assumed that he may have fallen and sprained an ankle or broken a leg. Walking past his cabin, they followed the path that Daniel had carved through the undergrowth. Little more than a mile along the path, his friends stopped in their tracks. They had found Daniel's body on the ground, bloodied and lifeless. His injuries were consistent with a brown bear attack. In those desperately sad and heart-stopping moments, they called the local police department to report the terrible news. Daniel's wife and friends were in utter disbelief that he was gone. He was such an experienced outdoorsman. They knew his knowledge and hunting expertise had served him well throughout the years, but now their worlds came crashing down. State wildlife biologists arrived on the scene. The stench of pepper spray was still in the air. The empty canister was found about 15 feet from Daniel's body. A thorough scout of the area found nothing that would have attracted a bear, such as a moose carcass or other food sources. Daniel had been working relatively close to 6 Mile Creek, a salmon spawning stream, but officials didn't consider it close enough to the attack site for Daniel to be considered prey. The puzzling evidence found by field experts was that both black bear and brown bear DNA were found on Daniel's body. It is usual for these bears to tolerate each other, and often black bears give the larger grizzlies a wide berth. However, with evidence of both bears present at the attack site, some locals considered them to have attacked Daniel together, a form of teamwork amongst bears. This, however, is highly unlikely. Bears are largely solitary animals. They do not hunt in pairs or groups, and subspecies never socially mix with one another. In fact, brown bears have been known to kill black bears. So what exactly did happen to Daniel? The most likely explanation is that he unknowingly disturbed a large female brown bear which attacked him. She wasn't necessarily preying on him, but had been startled and had felt threatened. She was eliminating this threat from her territory by attacking the intruder. Uninterested in eating him, she left the kill site. If bears cannot eat their prey then and there, they often cover it up, hiding it from other predators and scavengers in order to return to it later. There was no evidence of Daniel's body being partially buried or hidden with dirt or foliage. Bear spray may sting the eyes and nose when in direct contact, but it can also attract bears. In this case, a black bear was probably attracted either by the smell of the spray or by the fresh kill and made its way to Daniel's body. This would explain the presence of both bear subspecies at the site. But why was the bear spray ineffective during the initial attack? The regional wildlife supervisor for the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game, who was tasked with investigating Daniel's death, suspected the bear spray was faulty. The spray is sold by Costco stores in Anchorage and is manufactured by a company called UDAP. There had been concerns that some cans manufactured between March and August of that year could have been defective. There is also strong criticism over the effectiveness of bear spray, particularly regarding wind direction, which could result in the spray being blown away from the target. A flyby of the area where Daniel had been killed the following day found 2 black bears and 1 brown bear within several miles of Daniel's location. It's probable that many other bears were also in close proximity, but these were not spotted by officials. The DNA evidence collected from swabs of Daniel's body and clothing pointed towards 2 female bears. A week after the attack, wildlife biologists shot and killed 3 female black bears and 1 female grizzly. DNA from one of the black bears matched that found at the kill site. DNA from that brown bear did not. Following a bear attack, there is always some debate about the use of pepper spray. Some swear by it, others say it is foolish to go into bear territory without a high-caliber firearm. Although rangers and wildlife experts always recommend the use of bear spray over a firearm, research has shown that bear spray can actually be an attractant for some bears. Scientists studying bears in Alaska's Katmai National Park in the 1990s found that the majority of the bears they observed actually rolled and wriggled around in spray the researchers had sprayed onto the ground. They were vigorously scent rubbing their entire bodies in the spray residue. Sprayed directly from a can, however, results in the stinging of the eyes and nose, and this is thought to deter an approaching bear. The cause of Daniel's attack remains a mystery. It is still not known whether the attack was defensive or predatory. What has been determined, however, is that he was killed by a female brown bear who are notorious for mauling anyone who stands between her and her cubs, often leading to the unfortunate victim's final affliction. Researcher Stephen Riley had been deployed in the Arctic Circle to investigate the melting ice caps and the impact of global warming on the wild and marine life in the frozen vast expanse. Stephen had always wanted to witness the northern lights in the night sky, so he was glad that he got the chance to be there at just the time when Aurora Borealis is most clearly visible. It was a serene, heavenly place away from the distractions of life. He and his team had been staying at a caravan trailer parked a few miles from where they needed the samples. For the week that they stayed at the site, the night sky would sometimes be a clear, star-studded window into outer space, and other times a spectacular display of colors in the sky from the Aurora Borealis. But inhabiting this beautiful place were beasts that had seldom encountered humans. The most ferocious of these is the polar bear. At over 2 meters in height and weighing more than 1,000 pounds, these mammals were comfortable at the top of the Arctic food chain, feeding on everything from seals, walruses, and even beluga whales. However, global warming and the melting of the polar ice caps had been depleting the natural marine life of the area, and polar bears were starting to go long stretches of time hungry and without hunting. Stephen Riley finally got a chance to witness the northern lights about a week into their research trip, and he took several photographs of the beautiful display before returning to his caravan. In contact with his supervisor over the phone, Stephen was instructed to collect more samples of the thinning ice a few miles from their caravan. He was frustrated with his supervisor and tried to explain that the lack of marine life in this frozen wasteland was enough evidence that the ice was thinning due to global warming. The supervisor on the phone refused to budge and ordered him to collect and bring back more samples for research. Stephen angrily hung up the phone and decided to get it over with by going out into the freezing cold and getting the ice samples himself. He chose a site about a few kilometers from their caravan for the ice samples, but the foot-deep snow and blazing cold winds made it extremely difficult and time-consuming to walk there. He had no choice but to bring back the samples, which he thought would prove to his supervisors that he was right all along. Global warming had caused ice sheets on the water to melt and crack, leaving floating islands of ice separated by several feet of freezing water. Stephen had to hop from one sheet to the next and slowly make his way to the chosen site. He finally identified an appropriate spot to chisel off a piece of ice on the edge of the floating sheet. He crouched down and took out his tools for the job. Hunched over right on the cusp of the ice-cold water, he heard light splashes followed by a grunt. He couldn't get a good view of what it was and dismissed the sound for a whale or seal beneath the water. He heard the grunt again, and this time it sounded louder and closer. He realized it was not coming from beneath the water, but from behind him. He turned back and spotted a massive body of white fur over 7 feet tall right as it jumped to him. Frightened out of his senses, he instinctively ducked and felt the sharp claws of the animal scratch his shoulder as it plunged into the water on the other side. Stephen quickly realized the vulnerability of his circumstance. He had no transportation, no weapon, and no communication to contact his colleagues at the camp. He was alone in the vast frozen wasteland several miles away from safety, and all he had was a small can of bear spray in his backpack. He had only a few seconds to frantically search for it with his freezing and jittery cold hands before the polar bear clambered out of the water and ran after him once again. From the weight of the massive bear jumping at Stephen, the floating ice sheet wobbled and tilted, further throwing him off. He spotted the head of the beast coming out of the water as he unzipped his bag and rummaged through it trying to find the spray can. He finally found it and immediately turned around to spray the bear that was now charging right toward him. The intense and pungent smell of the chemicals inside the bear spray threw it off momentarily as it turned around and jumped back into the water. Stephen realized he had just bought himself a few more seconds to escape. He dropped his bag where it was and made a run for the caravan as fast as he could. The adrenaline was pumping, his heart was beating fast as he jumped from one ice sheet to the next, spraying the can behind him as he went. In desperation and the pain from his wound, he slipped on the sheet of ice and dropped the bear spray, which landed right in the water. He didn't have the time to recover it or the heart to look back, so he continued running as fast as possible in the direction of his caravan. As he ran, he tripped again on the edge of an ice sheet while trying to jump from one to the next. This time, he plunged into the water. The icy cold water drained him of any heat or energy that Stephen's body had retained by this point as he splashed around trying to get back up on his feet. However, before he could even get out of the water, he noticed the loud growls of the bear swimming behind him. His hands and legs numb from the freezing water made it much harder for him to get up and run. He let out a scream in terror. The bear got out of the water behind him and charged at Stephen. A terrifying, huge mass of fur. The sight of the predator running towards him with vicious intent numbed his senses. He was barely able to crawl now. With the caravan only a half a kilometer away, he tried desperately to scream to his colleagues at the campsite, but to no avail. The bear finally caught up to him, and by this time, the bear spray had been washed off its nose from swimming in the water. Now, there was nothing that could stop Stephen from being eaten alive by the hungry polar bear. He was left defenseless, numb, and terrified out of his senses. The bear stood up on its two hind feet and then slammed its two front feet straight onto Stephen's neck, snapping it in half. Stephen's fate was now sealed. The bear ripped its claws into his torso and neck, and he could only let out a slight squeal in his final moments before being devoured by the bear piece by piece. All that was later found by his colleagues at the spot was a few torn clothes, some bones and flesh, and a reddened spot in the white snow that told the tale of Stephen's final affliction. Our story today takes place in Bella Coola, a valley found in British Columbia, Canada. It stretches 80 kilometers and is known to be a very scenic and beautiful area, with a diverse landscape of meadows, forests, mountains, and rivers, as well as a long history of world-renowned craftsmanship. There really is something for everyone. As picturesque as this area may be, it is also situated in the Great Bear Rainforest, thusly named for its inhabitants, specifically many wild species of cougars, wolves, and of course, bears. But these bears are special. Although there are 1,400 grizzly bears living there, this area is home to a distinctive subspecies of black bear, the Kermode bear, also known as the spirit bear, as 1/10 of the cubs are born with the recessive gene causing a white coat of fur. As a result of its unique residence, the Great Bear Rainforest has been protected by the government of British Columbia since 2016 to stop industrial logging, meaning that 85% of the ancient forests will be kept safe. Given that the population of Bella Coola is only 2,100 people, there is approximately one bear to every 2 people in the area. Despite this, bear attacks have been very rare and they usually live side by side fairly peacefully. However, there is one incident that would change that forever. Jordan Carberry was a park ranger living in Bella Coola in 2018. He enjoyed his job, it was fairly easy, and he was able to work in such a beautiful place every day. On July 2nd, he was returning home after a lovely holiday with his friends to celebrate his 50th birthday. And as he approached his home, he saw 2 grizzly bears climbing a cherry tree nearby. This was not uncommon as the fruit on the trees were ripe and bears are well-known cherry lovers and they actually help with the dispersion process for the trees. They seemed quite large, so Jordan assumed they were just typical adult bears searching for food and meant no harm, although he would rather they were further away from his house. He continued up his driveway to encourage them to leave his property, and they eventually took the hint, traipsing back into the forests. He didn't give the interaction a second thought as he was used to seeing bears all the time, and he went to bed as soon as he got in. At 5 a.m. the next morning, he woke up and started to get ready as he usually did when something caught his eye out of the window. There was something moving behind the trees, and so he assumed it was the cherry-eating adult grizzlies from last night. He grabbed his camera and rushed downstairs, leaving the house to take photos that he thought he would later share with his friends. He was an avid photographer, and living in the beautiful place that he did meant that he was able to take amazing photos of his daily life. He figured that if he didn't spook the bears, they would ignore him and he could get some nice pictures of them eating the cherries. So he walked out into the forest, and 36 feet from his front door, he had a clear view of the bears in the tree. While he was watching the bears, one of them fell from the tree, and suddenly something moved next to Jordan. He turned to see what it was, and his heart stopped. He had made a mistake. The bears in the tree were actually cubs and were being supervised by their mother, the very large bear that was currently staring at him from 80 feet away. She had heard her cub cry out, and upon spotting Jordan, assumed the cry to be his fault. He knew that he was in a lot of trouble. She began walking towards him and then running straight towards him. Although he had been trained on how to react to grizzly bears and knew in the back of his mind that he should play dead, his natural instincts took over in the face of a 500-pound killing machine sprinting right at him. He turned and ran, knowing that he was only a short distance from his house, and thought maybe he could get in the door before she mauled him to death. He was running for his life, and he knew that the next few seconds could determine the rest of his life, however long that may be. Just 10 feet from his door, the bear smacked him in the back with her huge paw, and he was sent flying onto the ground. He was winded by the impact and barely had any time to register what was happening to him as he tried to stand up again. Immediately, the bear jumped on him and grabbed him by his head, trying to crush his skull in her strong jaws. He was terrified as he knew there was no way he could overpower the animal. Suddenly, he felt his feet leave the floor as he was lifted by his skull into the air. He thought he must be done for. The force was too much for his skull, and a large part of his scalp was ripped off, the pain blinding Jordan as he fell to the floor, blood gushing everywhere. He thought he could maybe crawl away as the bear was now holding his scalp in her mouth, so he was hoping she would just leave. He was wrong. After throwing Jordan's scalp aside, the bear began mauling his whole body. She tore off his ear and began to rip apart his chest, seemingly taking the cub's fall personally against Jordan, and it was like she had decided that he had to pay for the pain of her cub. He knew that his time was running out as the animal was not showing any signs of slowing down, seemingly determined to mercilessly tear him apart. He realized that he was not going to be able to wait it out or hope that she would leave, and in that moment, he remembered some of the training that he had been given in the past for this exact situation. He began to punch her in the head with as much strength as he could, which just further angered the bear. She flipped him onto his side to get his fists away from her and continued her attack. He quickly started kicking her in the eye with his heel, adrenaline increasing his strength, even though he had now lost a significant amount of blood. The bear started to back away a little, confused by the sudden rebuttal attack, and this gave Jordan enough time to pull himself to his feet again. After a second, the bear charged at him again, planning to end the fight once and for all. Jordan tried to punch her once again, this time aiming for her nose, but she managed to dodge his fists. As he continued to punch at the bear, he was able to slowly back away into his house and shut the door, waiting for the attack to continue. He knew that this door was only thin and the animal would easily be able to break it down with just a few body slams, but nothing happened. He waited for the crash of the bear entering the house to finish the job, but she never did. Instead, she just walked back into the forest, returned to her cubs, and left the scene. Although Jordan was thankful that the bear had now left him alone, he was now faced with another problem: surviving his extensive injuries. He lived in the middle of nowhere, he didn't have phone service. Who would he contact for help? He had no choice, he had to save himself. He managed to grab his car keys from upstairs, the adrenaline from the attack slowly wearing off, but he knew that if he passed out, he would never wake up again. Holding his chest closed, he left the house without checking his surroundings, and the bear had reappeared. She started charging at him once again, but he managed to get into the car and drive away. He was praying that he would make it to the hospital, praying that he would be able to see his wife and daughter again. Amazingly, he survived the drive and made it to his local hospital, where he was immediately airlifted to the Vancouver hospital. He had to have many surgeries in order to save his life. His right ear had been torn off, half of his scalp was missing, he had several puncture wounds from where the bear had tried to rip him apart, and an umbilical hernia from the repetitive climb from the bear. He had a long recovery journey ahead of him, but he was just grateful to be alive. He counted his blessings that she hadn't caught him that final time as he reached the car and accepts that the accident was fully his fault, as he shouldn't have risked his life just for some photos. He should have known better given his experience working with the bears, and recognizes that the bears were cubs and kept an eye on his surroundings. Either way, he was lucky to survive and went on to have a full recovery, narrowly escaping his final affliction.